Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Mark Givler, joined by Chip Minnick as always. We are down to our last couple of pre-spring looks at all the Big Ten teams, looking at three topics, questions, etc., things of interest before these teams open up their spring camps, and kind of what needs to be the focal point, what's important, what we kind of want to see coming out of the spring for all these teams in order to kind of have the best season that their ceilings will allow them to have. We are on to Wisconsin now. This is one that I think's super interesting. Full disclosure, I covered Luke Fickell for the better part of a decade while he was at Ohio State. I personally like Luke Fickell quite a bit, but they got to get going. That 1 year extension, that's not a vote of confidence. That's just classic college football, kind of keeping your coach signed 4 or 5 years out for recruiting purposes. That was not you're doing great, here's another year. That was just a standard thing. I think and we're going to actually do this after we do our capsules. We're going to kind of do a coaching hot seat thing around the Big Ten. And I think his seat is one of the warmest in the Big Ten right now. So they got to get this going. And the first step of that is figuring out the quarterback situation. They did something very interesting this offseason, Chip. They brought in two quarterbacks who were starting in other programs. So when you start at another program, then you transfer. They kind of moved up a level. Each of them moved up a level in competition. Those guys are both expecting to start. They didn't transfer to Wisconsin. These are two guys who they came to Wisconsin to play, and that is Billy Edwards Jr. from Maryland and Danny O'Neill from San Diego State. So this was a fascinating move. I get why Wisconsin's doing it. You bring in as many of these guys as you can because your quarterback situation's kind of been a nightmare. So you fish with dynamite, so to speak, and you just bring in all the quarterbacks you can and let the cream rise to the top. But this was an interesting move, Chip.
Extremely interesting. And you're right. I mean, Wisconsin has just been, you want to talk about something that has plagued Wisconsin for several years. And I'm going to say that this kind of actually, I believe was a contributing factor to the end of the Paul Chryst era. The fact that they were not able to successfully develop a continuity at the quarterback position. But and I respect the fact that you said that you personally have interacted with Luke Fickell and tremendous respect for him. I respect him for what he did at Cincinnati, but some of this, in my opinion, self-inflicted wounds. We've talked about this on previous episodes, but getting back to it about Billy Edwards Jr. or Danny O'Neill, the fact that you're bringing in two guys that are both going to be expecting to start. I'm not sure what the rationale is there. I mean, because no matter whoever winds up on the losing end, it's entirely possible that somebody might say enough of this and pull the ripcord and say that they're out. And so now your depth at the quarterback position is extremely precarious. So how Wisconsin manages this quarterback competition, I realize that this sounds like just about any program in the country, but especially at Wisconsin, where the quarterback position has been a contributing factor to the offensive efficiencies that we've seen in Luke Fickell's time at Wisconsin, I think is going to be one of those things that I'm going to be keeping an eye and ear out for when it comes to like Big Ten network analysis, when they start going around to the different programs for spring football.
Yeah, it's there's some urgency to this. This is not getting any easier for Luke Fickell right now, and they've got to figure this out. The glass half full look at the quarterback transfers would be that Danny O'Neill is a couple years younger than Billy Edwards. So if you're Wisconsin, I think the hope would be like if Billy Edwards wins the job, that you just tell Danny O'Neill, you're going to be the backup for a year. We'll turn this thing over to you eventually. Like that's going to be the pitch. If O'Neill beats out Edwards, I guess that's probably it's going to be an interesting situation for Billy Edwards to kind of sort through. But I think from a Wisconsin standpoint, that might actually be encouraging that the young guy, who's just a freshman last year, would do that. But they've got to navigate this pretty well. They've got a needle they've kind of got to thread here. So that'll be one of the big, again, this has been a theme on a lot of our show because we talk about this, like a lot of Big Ten teams lost their starting quarterback last year. So a lot of Big Ten teams are going into the spring with quarterback competitions, and Wisconsin is obviously one of those. Building off of that, the Phil Longo hire was a disaster. We had an episode about it where we pondered whether or not Luke Fickell firing him will actually ultimately end up saving his job. It was trending that badly with Phil Longo at the helm. Phil Longo's out. Can this team find an offensive identity? They had so much success for 30 years being a power physical running team. They bring in an air raid guy. Again, you want to see us rant about that, you can go back and look at other podcasts, episodes we've done around the Big Ten playlist. But that was a disaster. Can they? I mean, it's not can they have to, right? They have to find an offensive identity, and they really need to do it like now. Like now's the time to do it before it gets into the season.
With all respect to Sir Paul McCartney, get back to where he once belonged. That's what Wisconsin has to do. You have to embrace what worked for you in the past and incorporate what you believe could be successful in the passing game. And with the addition of Jeff Grimes as the new offensive coordinator now, I realize, for the average person that they're probably thinking, okay, well, you're so busy, tearing down, Longo as the offensive coordinator. What's the difference with Jeff Grimes? At least when he was with Kansas, he had a reputation for being able to run the ball. He also had previous experience at Baylor. So he comes from the Big 12, where, offense was a lot more wide open. So I would like to believe as a Big Ten football fan that this is going to be someone a little bit more in tune with, all right, here at Wisconsin, this is how we need to be able to run the ball effectively. We've got these massive offensive linemen that are used to just, moving people off the line of scrimmage. And by the same token, play action passing has to be a strong element of our game. I think of the Wisconsin offenses, the Wisconsin tight ends are usually, something that you're kind of, all right, you're just kind of expecting to be, if not their leading wide receiver, a key component of their passing game. So I think that has to be something that Luke Fickell has to be. I'm not saying that he's having sleepless nights, but he has to be thinking, all right, this is what we're going to be doing and focusing on exclusively this spring, is getting back to things that work at Wisconsin. Because like you said, the Longo offensive coordinator experiment, and like you said, we talked about it ad nauseum in previous episodes, but just to reiterate that you talk about self-inflicted mistakes. This was one that Luke Fickell, if this doesn't work out for Luke Fickell with regards to the seat that's starting to get extremely warm, he can look himself in the mirror and say, I did it myself. I created this issue. So I'm sure that's probably why there's a sense of urgency about getting this offense on the right track.
I'm optimistic about Jeff Grimes. Like you said, coming from Kansas, they do run the football there. Had a very good back there in Devin Neal the last couple of years. He's also an offensive line coach by trade. Mm-hmm. That's where he kind of got his start. He was an offensive line coach for many, many years. So I think this is a shift toward exactly what you said, which is getting back to being a power running team while incorporating maybe some modern techniques or modern schemes. So that gives me some sense of optimism. Now, is it now it's like, or is the talent there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is. I think, I think they're bringing back some good offensive linemen. So I think they can get back to that. But I do agree with you. I think there's certain programs where you can kind of be a chameleon and kind of like Alabama did this. Ohio State did this as well. Like we've seen Alabama and Ohio State run vastly different offenses at times over the last 25 years to have success. They've done it kind of every way you can do it. Wisconsin, like you're not getting like these 4-3, 4-4 like receivers, running backs. You're not finding those guys in your recruiting footprint. You really have to either get lucky and find a hidden gem somewhere like South Florida that kind of got under recruited, or they're just not like, there's not an abundance of those guys in your recruiting footprint. What you do have are you have these big polar bear like offensive linemen. And so I think you do have to recruit to that strength. And I do think there's a way that it kind of has to be done at Wisconsin. I don't think you want to get too far away from that. So let's see what they look like this spring. I can't wait to see kind of what the buzz is about what they're looking like offensively, what they're doing. If they've incorporated more of a power running game. But that'll certainly be one of the big stories of the spring for the Badgers. And then the last thing, this is a fairly common thing as well now with most teams, but which of the transfer portal additions will make an impact? We'll go beyond the quarterbacks. Obviously, we talked about the quarterbacks. If you have a point to make on the quarterbacks, by all means do it. But let's kind of dive into their portal situation.
All right. So you just mentioned about, Wisconsin is not a hotbed of wide receivers that are running 4-3. Hello, Jaden Ballard, transfer portal guy, and I selfishly would admit, as an Ohio State fan, the fact that he's an Ohio kid, it just never seemed to work out at Ohio State. I would love nothing more, selfishly, as an Ohio State fan, for Jaden Ballard to go to Wisconsin and flourish in the manner and fashion that I'm sure that he thought he could when he was at Ohio State, be that deep threat. I just talked about the idea of play action passing. Nothing would be better than, regardless of who the quarterback is, if it's Edwards or O'Neal, faking a handoff to a running back and hitting Jaden Ballard deep would be something that I would love to see. So I'm holding out hope that Jaden Ballard at wide receiver, being one of those transfer portal additions, that maybe this spring he can make some noise and be a positive contribution for that Wisconsin offense.
I think they're really counting on that. This is a program that, kind of glass half empty here, I guess, unfortunately, is, in my opinion, probably lost more talent to the portal than it brought in. This all, you lose CJ Williams to Stanford. So they have to get something out of Jaden Ballard. He's a good vertical threat. He's got a good size. He's a basketball kid coming out of high school. He was a very good high school basketball player. So he's got size and kind of some leaping ability to go up and make those catches. So I know they're hoping that he will open things up a little bit for them offensively, just with his deep speed. So that's obviously a great place to start. From there, they haven't been terrible on defense, but I wouldn't say they've been as good as people like maybe expected them to be. So you bring in like a De'Ani Hill from Miami at corner. Maybe he can give you something there in the secondary. He's a big physical defensive back. I think that's a guy to watch as well this spring, and kind of see if he's pushing that room. And then they bring in an interesting one. They bring in a kid from Grambling by the name of Michael Garner, a 6'7", 245-pound defensive lineman edge player. That's interesting. When you see teams like that poach an FCS kid, you're generally thinking that kid's going to be something. Like, you're not poaching an FCS kid as like a depth body generally. That's too high of a risk to take for like a depth body, because why? You can get a depth body from that can play it in the Big Ten, or you can play in the ACC or something like that. So to go to the FCS, when you poach a team from the FCS, you are generally thinking you got something there. You got something that could be pretty good, and so I'll be interested to see how that adjustment goes there, because they need some help up front too and defensively, and so that'll be an interesting one for me. So Chip, any parting thoughts, final thoughts here as the Badgers get ready to open here on March 8th?
I will say this much. We're going to do post-spring, like the other programs, we're going to do a schedule analysis. And I will just say that I'm sitting here surprised that Wisconsin, their season opener against Miami of Ohio, moves up to a Thursday. From what I've been able to see just on, various social media platforms, the fans of Wisconsin are not necessarily happy with this. But that being said, not to get too much into the schedule analysis, that it's pivotal for Luke Fickell, because the Big Ten schedule is difficult. Starting off against Miami of Ohio, which is one of the better teams within the MAC, isn't necessarily easy. So keeping an eye on Wisconsin this spring, I think, is something that Big Ten fans certainly should do, because this is a program that in my estimation, is at a crossroads.
No question. This is just an enormous year for Luke Fickell. So it starts now. It starts March 8th. So that'll do it for this one. We've got a few more comments. We're down to our last couple here, but appreciate everyone who's been following along with these. You can get them all at youtube.com/@SaturdayGlory. And we have a Around the Big Ten playlist you can find them on if you don't want to search for them too much, because we have a lot of NFL Combine stuff on there as well right now. So on the channel, and you can obviously download us on your podcast platform of choice. So thanks everyone for watching and listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.